be screwed. Feel my own adrenaline, yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 14th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfictionnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Castor hopped off the double-decker and headed down the street. It was a short walk to the Sport and Social Club building, officially named the Special Air Service Retired's Regimental Club. He stepped inside. "Sergeant Searle, it's been some time since you visited us last," said the official doorman. "Too true, Corporal Johnson, too true. But needs must, you know." He handed the man his umbrella and light coat. He straightened his tie in the mirror by the closet and brushed down his shirt and waistcoat. "Is the colonel in?" "Yes, sir, I believe he's in the red smoking room upstairs." "Shall I see if he's engaged?" "Yes, please." Castor walked into the main lounge and looked over the room. Most of the occupants were engrossed in either their newspapers or quiet conversation. "The colonel will see you now," Johnson said behind him. The ex-sergeant nodded his head and followed him. "Ah, Sergeant Searle, what a surprise," said the silver-haired man holding what was probably a whiskey in his hand. "Haven't seen you since your last promotion in Surrey." He was seated in a comfortable armchair, with a bottle and a second glass, already filled, on the table beside him. "What brings you to me today?" He gave Castor a quick up and down look. "And formal, too." "Well, sir, I've seen something that makes me a tad nervous. It's probably just my imagination, but," he shook his head. "Nothing illegal, what I've checked is all above board. But it just doesn't sit right." He handed the colonel the printout of property sales and little whinging and sat in the chair across from him. The colonel put down his glass and gestured to Searle to take the full glass on the table, then sat back and began perusing the papers. Castor took a sip. Yes, it was whiskey. He sighed and leaned forward, putting his elbows on his knees as he waited for the officer's reaction. When the colonel looked up and arched an eyebrow, he explained what he had seen when he visited Wisteria Estate in Little Whinging earlier that day. "Interesting story," the colonel said, topping off Castor's whiskey glass from the decanter. "Aha." He took another sip. "Everything seems to be going through this conveyance solicitor, Lynn Uesher. I checked with PC Stanford, he knows the man. Says he's been straight, as far as he knows. No problems and never been in trouble. Not a difficult feat when all you do is handle conveyances, but still. And then I have to wonder how they manage to get everyone to sell. I'd expect several to dig in their heels and say no, or hold out for more quid. But the records indicate they all sold for normal market values. Which is not normal. Someone always wants more." He frowned at his glass. "On the other hand, this Uesher was the one who set us on the Dursleys. Said he had a confidential source that something very bad had been going on there for several years." He looked up at the colonel. "You might have missed that, it hasn't hit the papers yet in any detail." "Don't know why." He shook his head. "An orphan boy living with abusive relatives. Straight out of Dickens. Nobody's seen the boy in a year. Word is he ran away." He scowled. "Enough BLD stains to make you wonder if he didn't." He shook his head. "They're currently at Her Majesty's pleasure, waiting trial." He took another sip. "There's more to this solicitor than anyone knows, I say. PC Stanford says he claimed client privilege when he asked for a bit more information about the buyer. Just said they wanted the properties for a big project. Then he explained what had happened when he had returned to Magnolia Road that evening before coming here. The colonel was holding his whiskey glass up before him, rolling it back and forth between his palms, deep in thought. "Colonel, there's something really dodgy going on here." She knew I was watching, but the angle I was at would have required her to step outside and look. I would have seen her. And she didn't. I would have said someone rang her up, but the houses within sight were all vacant. Or are supposed to be. She could have hopped over fences in the back gardens until she could see me, but then she would have had to know I was there in the first place. If she was in the forest, then why would she just stand in the forest watching me for 2 hours? He sighed. There are a half-dozen ways she could have known I was there, but none of them are things a civilian should think about or do. And just how did she know PC Havers and I had stopped to look in the houses on Privet Drive and Wisteria Way? He took a deep breath. Well. I know there's nothing you can do, it's just that I thought someone should know, just in case. He shook his head. Give me a halo any day over this CRP. The colonel grinned at him. I understand completely. Give me a straight-up fight and I'm fine. Creeping around in the dark when you don't know who or what to trust. Nah. Don't like that at all. He sighed and became serious. Look, I'll contact a few friends and see if I can find anything. Hopefully, it's all just some industrial maneuvering and nothing serious. He finished his whiskey. Ring up your chief inspector and let him know. Take a PC with you for backup, and a sergeant, if your chief will allow it. As you say, it's probably nothing. Let me know how it turns out. Castor hoped he wasn't about to hit the second Chinese curse of life, may you live in interesting times. Harry and the Phillies had settled into a simple routine. They spent their nights in Little Whinging and the days at the Weasleys, playing and practicing magic, where, to their great delight, sap was not involved. The adult equestrians took turns staying with them in Little Whinging or Little Whinnying, as Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash liked to call it almost always with Twilight. Rarity and Applejack took turns. Sometimes one of Scootaloo's aunts would join them. Twilight and Blueblood spent their days working on the embassy problem, sometimes with the help of one of the others when they weren't working their jobs in Equestria. Or the Mares took additional shopping expeditions in both new worlds. Harry didn't have to guess who led the attacks on the bookstores. Applejack did take Ron into the orchard one day and spent it teaching him about Earth Pony magic. Ron didn't mind the lessons, as he was learning magic that only he, as an Earth Pony, could do. And the orchard had never looked better, according to his father. Their finding and helping to ripen several whortleberry bushes had made Mrs. Weasley very happy. Getting an entire harvest at once instead of across several weeks meant she could make several pies instead of the occasional small tarts she had always had to do before. Not to mention the time saved in trekking back and forth. Ginny was especially pleased, as she and Ron usually had the chore of picking them. The Weasleys, and the Quidditch team, were curious about Atlantis. And the equestrians were curious about the wizarding world. Questions were asked, and answered. It wasn't difficult for the equestrians to not mention the name for their homeland, as most everything they talked about was in Ponyville or something they had heard about in Canterlot. Apple Bloom did mention Appaloosa a few times because of her cousins. Ginny no longer ran from the room when Harry arrived. Her Pegasus form seemed to have given her new confidence. However, she tended to squeak whenever she came across him unexpectedly. Or he, her. 2 days after Ginny and the Quidditch team had learned to SWCH to their animagus forms, Scootaloo had had a sleepover with the girls so she could teach them the proper methods to groom and care for their new feathery appendages. Then the 4 of them had cornered Oliver the next morning and proceeded to embarrass him half to death by showing him, and having him practice on them. The older girls seemed to find it hilarious, to the younger two's confusion. It was a necessary skill, after all. And very relaxing when someone else was doing the work. Fingers, Scootaloo discovered, were marvelously efficient at that particular task. The twins' running commentary had been funny, Harry had thought, until Oliver grabbed his wand and chased them away with threats of unrelenting Quidditch practices once they got back to school. Tonight was going to be another sleepover, this time for all of the younger kids, Ron and Harry in one bedroom while the 5 girls had a different one. Although, if they were going to be using the Trunks' bedrooms because they were bigger than the Weasleys' bedrooms, was the sleepover at Little Whinging or at the Weasleys'? Miss Arrow opened the door as he walked up to it. "Well, I'm glad you could make it," she said. She made a show of leaning to the side and looking at his car. "PC Barbara Havers couldn't make it, I assume." The curtains in the windows were drawn, so he couldn't see into the sitting room. He smiled at her wanly. "No, I didn't want to disturb her day off." Actually, she was in a van with PC Stanford. They were parked near Little Whinging Center and monitoring the radio wire he was wearing. "That's too bad," the woman said. "It might have been better if she were here, too." She opened the door wide and gestured he should come in. "Come in, some important people are waiting for you." With more than a little trepidation, Castor stepped inside. She pointed into the sitting room as he walked past her. She closed the door, and followed him into the sitting room. He stopped and looked at the 6 people gathered in there. One woman was standing by the fireplace, a slightly older man in his late 20s was seated in the armchair beside the fireplace to Castor's left, 3 young women were on a couch against the wall on the right, and a gentleman of about the same age as Castor was standing beside the couch. Searle estimated that the young women were all of barely college age. Miss Arrow stepped in front of him and bowed to the attractive standing woman, who had waist-length dark purple hair with a pink stripe slightly to the right of the middle. The woman was wearing an expensive and finely tailored dress, in subtle shades of blue, with white stars scattered across the bottom. Like Miss Arrow's dress, and the dresses worn by the other women, it reached to her knees in length. She looked at Castor inquisitively and seemed a little nervous. "Your Highnesses, ladies, allow me to introduce Detective Inspector Castor Searle," Miss Arrow said in a formal tone. Castor felt his eyebrows shoot up. Miss Arrow turned to face him. "Detective Inspector Castor Searle, I would like you to meet Her Royal Highness, Princess Twilight Sparkle." She swept her arm to indicate the standing woman. He nodded at her. "Pleased to meet you, Your Highness." He bowed. He had no idea what these people were playing at, but he could play along until he got the true lay of the land. "And it is a pleasure to meet you, too, Detective Inspector Castor Searle," she said, nodding her head back at him. "Please call me Twilight." She paused a second, then added, "I find the title to be tiresome." He nodded again, but before he could say anything, Miss Arrow continued with her introduction. "This is His Highness, Prince Blueblood." The man, seated in an old armchair, had long straight golden blonde hair spilling halfway down his sides. He had a bored expression and a teacup in his hand. He was wearing a tailored charcoal gray 3-piece suit with a rose-red boutonniere. Castor didn't recognize the flower, but the way it seemed to slightly shimmer in the light was unusual. He also recognized the aristocratic air the man had. This man was noble-born. Or a very good actor. Time would tell. "A pleasure to meet you, Your Highness," Castor said. He got a sniff and a bored, "Of course it is," in response. "Lady Rarity," Miss Arrow said next. She indicated a purple-haired beauty wearing a yellow and pink dress sitting on the couch. Lady Rarity had a rose-colored light shawl that color-coordinated perfectly with her dress. He smiled at her and offered a soft, "A pleasure, I'm sure." He got a demure smile in return and a "nice to meet you" response. Lady Rainbow Dash was the woman beside Lady Rarity, another lovely young woman who had, literally, a rainbow of colors in her hair and wore a dress to match. She had a look in her eye, as if she were about to challenge him to a race, which was a very odd thing for Castor to think. "Hiya," she said before he could open his mouth. He nodded to her and gave her a "nice to meet you" response. He noticed the edges of Prince BLD's mouth turn down in disapproval at the young woman's casual attitude. "Lady Applejack," Miss Arrow continued. This pretty young woman had pale yellow hair and wore a green dress decorated with apples. And was seated beside the other 2 women. Incongruously, she was wearing an American-style Western hat. "Howdy partner," she said in a thick Southwestern American accent, standing and holding out her hand. He shook it, responding with a simple, "Hello, nice to meet you." She sat back down. He had to wonder about the accent. It was so out of place with the others. And why she was the only one to stand and shake his hand. "And this is Solicitor Lynn Uesher, Esquire," she concluded. The man stepped forward and held out his hand. He was probably Chinese, Castor guessed. And not a piker, as his strong grip confirmed. "A pleasure to meet you," said the man. "And to meet you," replied Castor. The DI took a moment to look around the room. It was decidedly out of step with the people in it. It looked more as if an old spinster lived here and not obviously very rich nobles. What was going on here? Another woman came into the sitting room from the short hall. She had probably been in the kitchen. She whispered something to Miss Arrow, who made a face of displeasure and turned to Searle. "Excuse me, Detective Inspector Castor Searle, but are you trying to allow others to listen in to our conversation?" Castor froze in place. They had detected the radio signal. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" She nodded at his response, as if she had expected it. "Would you please step outside for a moment and reassure your colleagues that everything is fine? They are getting a bit agitated that your signal cut off the moment you stepped inside." She gave him a significant look. "We wouldn't want there to be any incidents, now would we?" He felt his face heat up as he blushed. He was a soldier and detective, not an undercover agent or spy. He cleared his throat, certainly. He followed her to the door and then stepped outside under her watchful eye. "PC Havers," he said. "I'm fine. They have some sort of signal blocking device inside the house, so you'll just have to be patient." A police car turned the corner at the far end of the street. He stepped farther out and waved, smiling. The car cruised up and stopped. The officers inside gave him a questioning look. He nodded and gave them the hand signal that he wasn't in any danger. He used his body to block it from being seen by the woman, who was clearly a bodyguard of some kind. After a long look at him, they nodded and left. As he stepped past her into the house, Miss Arrow said, "Don't worry, I would have done the same. Glad to see you're being professional about things." Prince Blue BLD was giving him the stink eye when he stepped back into the sitting room, however. He noticed that Miss Arrow took a position straddling the boundary between the hall and the sitting room and watching both the front door and him. Much the way a professional bodyguard would. Princess Twilight Sparkle smiled at him. "Please sit," she indicated an armchair by the windows and across the room from the fireplace. "I'm happy to see you're taking this seriously. We're hoping you'll be able to help us with a problem." "How so?" he said as he sat. "Well," she glanced uncertainly at her friends. "As you noticed, the houses on this street are all vacant. So are the ones on the streets around us." She paused and looked at him. "Yes, I know." He knew that pretending he didn't know more would be a mistake. A company by the name of Royal Equestrian Properties seems to have bought them all. "Your company, I would guess." She smiled broadly. "Excellent. You've done your homework." She pursed her lips, thinking. "I have to give you a bit of background, and it's going to be hard to believe. We can prove it all, but that's for later." He nodded. "We come from a foreign country, and we want to establish an embassy with your fine country. The problem is, your foreign office refuses to believe we are a sovereign nation wanting to establish an embassy." The solicitor was nodding. "They told us to have an ambassador from a country we have relations with to make an appointment to meet with the proper authorities. Then she can introduce our ambassador, who in turn, would then tender our ambassadorial papers." She shook her head. "We don't know any ambassadors to assist us. Hence, we can't make an appointment, except at the lowest levels, and that appointment would be several months away, if ever." She nodded her head. "We could just appear in front of Buckingham Palace, but that would undoubtedly cause a panic. The same is true if we simply went to the newspapers with our request. Except some people would say it was a hoax, and then things would get tiresome. In both cases, I'm afraid we would be swamped here with curiosity seekers. It could quickly get out of hand. And we might end up with a situation neither of us wants. She looked back at him. That's why we were so pleased to hear that you had noticed the vacant houses and had stopped by. If you were to relay our request up your chain of command, with appropriate proofs, it shouldn't take too long before the Foreign Office was informed and then we could present our ambassadorial papers and get the ball rolling. To Castor's surprise, she actually hopped in place. He stared at her, stunned. For all the expensiveness and fine tailoring of her dress, it was apparent she wasn't wearing any underwear support. He blinked. You represent a foreign government that no one has ever heard of? He asked incredulously. The Foreign Office had a list of every country in the world. If a solicitor showed up asking to make an appointment for his client to present ambassadorial papers, all they had to do was look at that list and set an appointment. If the country wasn't listed, then they would call it a prank and toss the man out the door. If he made enough of a nuisance of himself, they would arrest him. She stopped bouncing and sighed. Yes. And that's where it gets complicated. She looked at him, her head tilted slightly. When I say a foreign country, I mean a foreign country on a different world. Equestria is the largest country on our world, Equus. World? He was sure his eyebrows couldn't be any higher. Then, how did you get here? He said skeptically. He almost asked if they had a flying saucer in the back garden. She waved her hand vaguely in the direction of the forest across the street. We discovered a portal between our worlds. It's rather small, just big enough for someone to walk through. But it's there. That's why we're buying all these properties so no one accidentally comes across it before we're ready. And we will have ample room to protect it once word does get out. He sat, blinking. This was straight out of a science fiction film. Time Bandits or Evil Dead came to mind without the bizarre appearances and equally bizarre circumstances. Although there were the striking hair colors. So, you're aliens. Except for their brilliantly colored hair, they didn't look any different from any other person he had ever seen. In fact, they looked a lot more mainstream human than some of the people he had run into during his time in sport and social. The one with rainbow-colored hair snickered. Oh, yeah, she said, that's an easy one. Dash, said the princess, firmly. Ah, Dash cajoled, come on, this is boring. Let's just show him, already. The princess sighed. The prince rolled his eyes and mumbled something that sounded like uncouth commoners. He looked even more bored than before, giving the impression he would rather be almost anywhere else. And that he was here only because he had no choice in the matter. Right, the princess said, more to herself than anyone else. She looked back at Castor. We really are aliens to this world. There really is a portal between our worlds and the forest over there. She again pointed in that direction. And we look nothing like we appear to you. She smirked. In fact, I've been told that we are quite adorable. The solicitor gave him a half-smile. They are, indeed, adorable, he said wryly. I thought they were a telly show pranking me when we first met last month. He looked levelly at Castor. They are telling the truth. Can I now? Asked Dash eagerly, can I? It's the quickest way to convince him short of tossing him through the portal like we did Linny here. The princess sighed. Okay, she said resignedly, go ahead. Yeah, shouted the woman on the couch. He stared in complete disbelief as a small horse appeared on the couch where the woman had been sitting, still wearing her dress. She was blue-furred, with a rainbow-colored mane and tail. She had no sooner appeared, than she launched herself into the air and hovered, her wings flapping lazily. He could see that slits in the back of her dress allowed her wings to come out without hindrance. He leaned back in shock as she flew around the room, breaking almost every law of physics he was aware of and probably a few he wasn't. And she couldn't have been more than a meter tall, from hooves to the top of her head. He had never heard of horses that small. Oh, Celestia, this feels good. She hovered in front of the princess. Sitting there without wings was just killin' me, she said, rolling her eyes in exaggeration. He heard a sigh from the couch, drawing his attention. As soon as he looked, Lady Rarity turned into a small white horse with a poofy purple mane and tail. And a horn on her forehead. She was a bloody unicorn. She jumped down from her place on the couch and posed. His wife was going to think he had gone off his trolley when he told her of this. Lady Applejack laughed at his expression, and transformed into a small orange horse with a pale yellow mane. She had neither wings nor a horn, but her hat remained in place. And seemed oddly suiting for her. The dresses for the ponies were draped across their bodies. Their previous knee-lengths meant the front hems of the skirts now hung down almost to the floor. The princess spoke again, and there you see 3 of the 7 major pony races in Equestria. Unicorn. Lady Rarity lifted her head proudly. Pegasus. That's me, said the flying horse, zipping over to him and then back. And Earth. Lady Applejack, her hat still on her head, just sat on the couch, much as a cat or dog sits upright, and grinned at him. Flummoxed at what he was seeing, he said the only thing he could think of at the moment to the princess, "Which one are you?" She sighed. "I was a unicorn, but I recently ascended to the rarest type of pony in our world. There are only 4 of us. I'm an alicorn." Almost reluctantly, she changed into a purple horse with both wings and a horn. "That makes me a member of the royal family." She was a little bit larger than the other 3. Castor turned his eyes towards Prince Blue BLD. The man rolled his eyes. "I am not an entertainer to perform parlor tricks on request," he said snootily in a refined accent, "especially not to commoners." He took a sip of his tea. "I am a unicorn and a member of the royal family. And I am Princesses Celestia's and Luna's chosen ambassador to your barbaric world. That is all you need to know." "Blue blood," the princess said sharply. The man sked, rolled his eyes, and looked up at the curtains. His expression settled back into that of someone incredibly bored. The other horses gave the man disapproving looks and grumbled. The detective inspector turned to look at Miss Arrow. She grinned and said, "I'm on duty." The solicitor came over and held out a cup of tea in a saucer with one hand. "I think you might need this." When Castor looked at him, he smiled and tilted his other hand so that Castor could see the small shot bottle of whiskey concealed therein before dropping it into his pocket. Searles looked up at the solicitor, who nodded while arching an eyebrow. "I needed a rather stiff drink after first meeting them, too," he said softly. Gratefully, Castor took the proffered saucer and took a sip from the cup. He nodded. "Thanks." Then he drained the cup. The burn as it went down felt wonderfully bracing. "Think nothing of it." He could hear the amusement in the Oriental's voice. Castor thought about what he now knew. Aliens. Honest-to-God aliens. And another world accessible through a portal. The implications were so far above his pay grade he couldn't even calculate where to start. His mind was spinning in so many directions that it might as well have been blank. And they really were the cutest things he had ever seen. He heard one of the horses know, she had said ponies, they were ponies say, "He's awfully quiet. Do you think we broke him?" The solicitor cleared his throat. "No, just thinking deeply." Castor looked up from his empty teacup. "Mind if I ring someone up? Invite them over." The princess looked at him and shook her head. "Nope, go right ahead. We cleared the day for this." "Thank you," he said. He stood and walked over to the telephone and started dialing. He kept his back to the ponies and people, and would try to keep his voice low. The telephone was probably bugged, anyway, he reflected. Aliens had landed in England. And their heads barely reached his belly button. He stared at the staircase wall in front of him as the phone on the other end rang. They were going to throw the entire world into turmoil. And ground zero was right here in the nondescript little town of Little Whinging, Surrey, England. And, God help him, he was in the middle of it. He had well and truly fallen into the rabbit hole. Their only question left was, Special Air Service Retired's Regimental Club. Hello. Is the Colonel in? This is Sergeant Searle. I will see if he is engaged. Castor waited for a minute or so for the club's corporal to check, and deliver a phone if he was. There was a loud click as the receiver was lifted. Colonel Thiessen here. Ah, Colonel. I was hoping you'd be in. Have you concluded your appointment? Actually, I am there right now, sir. Number 11 Magnolia Road, Little Whinging. Indeed. Aha, it's much more than what we thought. Could you come out here? It's rather important. Is it now? He could hear the doubt and annoyance in the man's voice. Yes, sir. These people are, well, I can say without fear of exaggeration, that this is a matter of national security and the Foreign Office. He heard a heavy sigh. And before you ask, yes. Yes, I'm sober. Very sober. Much more so than I want to be, if you want to know the truth. And what is it that is so important? It was his turn to sigh. If I tried to tell you, you'd think I had been drinking. I can assure you that the Prime Minister and the Queen will have to be briefed. And it involves an ambassador from a foreign country. Is that so? Came the reserved response. You can have my pension if you think I'm wrong. If this indeed is a matter of national security. It is. Very, very, much so, sir. Then I will need to make a few phone calls and bring some others with me. He turned and asked, can he bring some people with him? The princess looked at her friends and shrugged. Sure, she looked around the room and smiled, just remember, we aren't exactly in a lecture hall here. He turned to face the staircase again. Yes, bring whom you want, but not too many, we are in a small house sitting room and bring cameras. Lots of cameras. Cameras. For evidence, I assume. It'll be about 2 hours. That's correct. About 2 hours. See you then. He hung up and turned to face them again. He has to make a few phone calls, and then he'll be right over. He's in London, so it'll take about 2 hours for him to get here. Mind if I bring PC Havers up to speed? No. No, I don't mind at all. Why don't you invite her in? The princess suggested. He stepped outside, Miss Arrow just behind him. Hey, PC Havers. I'm just checking in. This is so far out of our jurisdiction, it's not funny. I used the phone inside to kick it upstairs. Someone will be here in about 2 hours. He turned and went back inside, Miss Arrow again following him. Seeing their questioning looks, he said, she wouldn't come in, anyway. Standard operating procedure. It might be a trap. They all nodded in understanding. That's too bad, said the princess. She sighed, but I understand the reasoning. That would be something Chrysalis would do. She looked up at him. Set a trap, I mean. Fortunately, we have no interest in setting traps. The little purple pony began trotting in place. There is just so much to learn. She spun in place. The flying one, Lady Dash, snickered, don't let her in your national library, we'd never get her out of it. The orange one, Lady Jack, he thought, laughed and said, she's already figured out it would take 114 years to read all your books. She paused, then muttered, and I wouldn't put it past her to try. The princess stopped trotting and stomped her hoof. Girls, that's over 20 times the number of books in the Royal Canterlot Library. And they publish more books in a week than we do in a year. Lady Rarity said, Twilight, you've already shipped home more books than the sociologists can read in a year. Lady Dash laughed again, yeah, I thought that bookstore manager was gonna pee his pants when you gave him that order for 5,000 books. And then paid him in bits in advance. But he was such a gentle stallion, delivering them to us himself when they arrived, said Lady Rarity approvingly. Lady Dash snorted, and got an order for another 1,000 books for his trouble. Castor stared at them. This was terrible. They had been here for weeks and were basically looting the human world's knowledge. Sure, they were paying for everything, but they now had far more intelligence on the humans than the humans could possibly get in return in years. He cleared his throat. If you don't mind my asking, just how advanced are you, compared to us? They stopped their arguing over whether or not the princess was too enthusiastic about books and turned back to him. He noticed that Prince BLD was now watching him instead of staring off into the distance. The princess frowned. Well, in some areas we are clearly far ahead of you. While you know far more about viruses and bacteria and their transmission, we can cure most diseases without difficulty. Cancer, which seems to be a big issue for you, is a simple potion cure if we can catch it early enough. She sighed, although we do still lose a pony to it every now and then. We can regrow lost limbs, as well. If we can get someone to a healer fast enough, we can almost always save them, no matter what their affliction. She smiled proudly. It helps that we're very durable. From what we've seen on your telly, you people are extremely fragile. Crashes that would leave one of us slightly dazed seem to kill you outright. She started trotting in place again. However, your advances in vitro fertilization are simply stunning. And operating on fetuses to fix problem before BRTH. Astounding. She sighed and stood still. On the other hoof, militarily, we are far behind you. Most of our guards train with spears and crossbows. She smiled. We do have fireworks, but not rockets, rifles, or cannons. We've never needed anything more advanced to deal with our enemies, so we never pushed any farther. She smirked. In fact, I know of one recent war that was settled by a pie fight. She shuddered. I cannot imagine needing something as terrible as one of your nuclear weapons. He stared at her incredulously. A pie fight, he repeated weakly. Was she kidding him? She nodded. And we do have a railroad system. It's not as extensive as yours, and we use steam engines. As for flight, well, 1/3 of our population flies, so it has never really been an issue. I do have a balloon I use sometimes, though. And there are a few blimps in commercial use. Some nobles use them as air-going yachts, too. But we have nothing like your commercial jets. She hummed for a moment. We've just never seen the need for that much speed, I guess. Jets, PHHT, Lady Dash said disparagingly. I'm the fastest Pegasus in Equestria. She flew up almost into his face. I can clear a sky of clouds in 10 seconds, flat. Clouds, he repeated, bewildered, 10 seconds. Oh, yes, the princess continued, we control almost all the weather, with only occasional freak storms coming in from the ever-free forest or the oceans. She frowned as she looked over at the curtained windows. That's actually one of the hardest things for us to get used to here. The weather here is so random. We would never allow a tornado to do so much damage. She shuddered. And I can't remember the last time I heard of a rainstorm causing a flood. We would disperse such a storm long before it endangered any lives. She looked over and up at Dash, who was hovering just below the ceiling. We'll be doing the running of the leaves to usher in fall in a few weeks. Lady Dash zoomed over to hover in front of Lady Jack. I'm gonna beat you this year, just you wait. Applejack rolled her eyes. You all keep telling yourself that, honey. Rainbow Dash just glared at her. And then there's quantum physics, Twilight said, ignoring the two squabbling ponies. Lady Dash had landed and the two were now pushing back and forth against one another like a couple rugby rivals, as the prince watched disapprovingly. It sounds remarkably similar to our theories. The string theory proposed by your scientists is quite interesting and would explain some things that we've been puzzling over the last 100 years. I think that if we cooperate we might be able to pull together a complete universal theory of everything that will fit all the observational evidence we have. And we've confirmed the multi-world theory, as well as time travel. She shuddered. Time travel is just too paradoxical. He knew his mouth was hanging open. Militarily, they were at the bow and arrow era, yet their medicine outstrppd the dreams of almost every doctor in the world, and they had an understanding of quantum theory that only the most highly developed modern countries could afford to research. Plus, they could control the bloody weather. A bloody deep rabbit hole, indeed. So, back in your home world, you're mostly herbivores and only Pegasi eat meat with any regularity? That's correct, said Princess Twilight Sparkle. Castor had heard of horses eating meat on occasion, but it was still a surprise to hear that these ponies did so, too. So, he supposed, it shouldn't be all that outrageous to hear that while they were in their human forms, they also ate meat. They might not be completely comfortable, emotionally, doing so, but they did do it. Then again, there had been a few dishes served to him when he was overseas with the sport and social that he would rather not think about. He glanced down at the two pony heads lying on his thighs. He wasn't exactly sure how it had happened. The two ponies had been in the midst of their continuing shoving match to Prince Bld's obvious disdain and disgust when they stumbled over to his chair. Reflexively, as with a big dog, he had reached out to push them away. By accident, he had done what he would have done with any friendly large dog, he had started scratching one of them, he thought, behind the ear, as a distraction. Her eyes had gone wide and she had immediately leaned into it. He had been surprised that she hadn't started purring. Lady Jack had watched, puzzled, until Lady had groaned and said, "Oh Celestia. This is fabulous." And twisted her head so he could scratch the other ear. A second later, he was using both hands. He had gone down the back of their necks, in their manes, to much and wriggling in place. And startled looks from the princess and Lady Rarity. When he started scratching at the base of Dash's wings, he had thought she was going to melt to the floor. Followed, a second later, by her murmured, "Marry me." Which had led to his current predicament. Trapped in his chair by two ponies who each weighed as much as he did. He would have liked a refill on his tea, but every time he stopped massaging an ear, the owner of said ear would growl and open one eye to glare at him. Currently, the orange one had him scratching her back just below her shoulder blades. Meanwhile, he had time to reflect that the ponies didn't need high-tech weapons to conquer humanity. With those soulful eyes, fluffy coats, and overall adorable appearance, people would walk into their cages without complaint, all the while cooing at how adorable and cute their captors were. Of course, the humans could retaliate by refusing to give tummy rubs and ear scratches unless the ponies capitulated, in turn. It would be a Mexican standoff, or would that be a stalemate situation? A woman walked up behind Miss Arrow and whispered in her ear. Miss Arrow then went to the princess, said something. Princess Twilight nodded and looked over at the detective inspector. "Your friends should be here in a few moments." She gave him a tight smile. "They seem to have brought reinforcements, who are waiting just outside the neighborhood." He nodded slowly. "I kind of expected that." She gave him a wry smile. "I suppose I did too." "Excuse me, ladies, but I'm needed," he said, looking down at his two lap weights. "Ah," Lady said disappointedly, "do you have to? You can wait a few more minutes." Lady Jack just sighed deeply and said, "Come on, might as well change back to people again." Suiting actions to words, he had a young woman leaning against his legs. Unfortunately, he now had his hand very inappropriately partway down the back of her dress. He jerked his hand back, and felt his face turn hot as he blushed. She gave him a questioning look, clearly not understanding the impropriety of where he had had his hand. He hoped no one ever mentioned it to his wife. He doubted she would be as blasé about the incident. She was rather territorial. Sighed in turn and slowly straightened before turning back into a person, as well. "Oh," she said contentedly, "that was wonderful. Chui, you have to hire one of these guys as official ear scratcher at the palace." She sighed again. "You all mean wing scratcher, don't ya?" snarked her friend. Castor blinked as he watched Lady turn a bright red. "Hey," she said in embarrassment, "it was nothing like that." Lady Applejack snickered, "You keep tellin' yourself that, honey." In a softer undertone that only the three of them could hear, she added, I heard you propose, there, honey. Dash flushed an even darker shade of red that began to creep down her chest and out from under the short sleeves of her dress. Castor gave them both a wide-eyed look, then stood. Well, he said, then cleared his throat, I should probably meet them outside. It might be a good move to open the curtains, as well. He headed for the front door, Miss Arrow behind him. When he glanced back inside as he stepped outside, he saw a guard taking her previous position. When he looked back at his car at the curb, he saw a man leaning casually against the side of the house across the street, a woman beside the house to the left, and another standing at the path into the forest. It looked like the equestrians had called in a few reinforcements of their own. Or decided to let him see the ones they had already in position. He had to be careful. They were cute and adorable, but clearly the top predators of their world despite looking and acting like a prey species and therefore must be dangerous in their own way. He heard an excited babble of voices from the sitting room as Miss Arrow closed the front door behind them. The Land Rover that pulled up behind his car fairly screamed that oxymoron, military intelligence, at him. Probably MI5. However, because this involved a possible ambassador, it might be MI6. Maybe both. The colonel had some high friends indeed. And they had actually listened, for once. 4 people climbed out of the, one them festooned with cameras. The colonel had taken his suggestion to heart, Castor was pleased to see. He met them halfway down the garage drive. This had better be good, the colonel half growled. Castor gave him a weak smile. Good afternoon, Colonel, gentlemen, he said. Before we go any farther I must say that my radio link to my associate, PC Havers, cut out the moment I stepped inside the door. So, if any of you have transmitters, they will fail. He gave them a moment to consider that. And the listeners on the other end to finish cursing. I've asked them to keep the curtains open. They all looked over to the front windows where they saw the 5 women looking back at them, and waving when they saw the men looking at them. Castor noticed that Miss Arrow, by the front door, had partially turned to look into the forest at the end of the street. Which just so happened to keep an ear in their direction, he half smiled to himself. She would have to have exceptional hearing to learn anything. He faced the colonel, again. And they told me you were almost here when you drove into the estate. That made the newcomers exchange looks. With reinforcements. The looks exchanged were a bit more alarmed. Here's the problem. These people are aliens. As in, not from our world. He ignored the mild snort of disbelief from one of the 2 men he had marked as MI agents. The other merely rolled his eyes and stared at him. We don't want to PP this up, we'll only have one chance at it, I'm sure. They can prove it, and did to me. He looked at the man with the cameras. Do you have a video camera? The man nodded. Get it out and get it going. He looked at the colonel, who had raised his eyebrows. Trust me, you'll want a full record of this. He waited for the man to get the camera running. They want to establish an embassy with us. That's why they invited me to meet them. I'll let them explain the rest. He turned and led the small group to the house. Miss Arrow opened the door for them and ushered them inside. Your Highnesses, ladies, Castor said as soon as they were in the sitting room. He turned to the colonel. May I present Colonel Jason Thiessen, retired. Colonel, he turned back to the equestrians. I would like to introduce Her Royal Highness Twilight Sparkle, His Highness Blue BLD, Lady Rarity, Lady Applejack, and Lady Rainbow Dash. And this gentleman is their solicitor, Lin Yuesher. The colonel gave him a long look, then turned to the waiting equestrians and bobbed his head in an abbreviated bow. Your Highnesses, ladies, it is a pleasure to meet you. These 3 gentlemen with me are Lewis Carroll, John Tenniel, and Charles Dodgson. Each gave a similar bob of their head as they were named, murmuring cordial greetings. John had his video camera held in one hand, running, and was glancing occasionally at the tiny display turned to one side. Your Highness, I think we should first demonstrate that you really are not natives to this world, Castor suggested to Princess Twilight. "Oh. Me. Me," shouted Lady Dash, leaping to her feet. They all noticed Prince BLD rolling his eyes and sighing deeply, Princess Sparkle face-palming, and the others all shaking their heads. The princess nodded. "Yes, Dash, go ahead," she said with an annoyed sigh. "Yes," shouted Dash, jumping up and transforming back into her native form in midair. She swung around to face the astonished newcomers. "Bet you didn't expect that, did ya?" She laughed. "It's me, Rainbow Dash. The fastest Pegasus in Equestria." She zipped around the room almost too fast to see, banking around the walls like those motorcycle daredevils who race on horizontal tracks, as Castor had once seen on the news. How she missed clipping one of them with her wings as she did so, he couldn't figure out. He shook his head. He had seen some people with massive egos, but this pony would give them a real run for their money. The newcomers couldn't take their eyes off of her as the colonel muttered, "They're flying horses?" Their expressions ranging from a controlled blank to surprise, and even a bit of fear. But they were professionals and kept themselves under control. Castor cleared his throat and, speaking softly, said, "No, sir. Only some of them are flying ponies. The rest are either regular ponies or unicorns." The colonel was smart enough to catch his emphasis. The colonel gave him a sharp look, as did Carol and Dodgson. Tenniel was keeping the camera focused on the Pegasus. "Unicorns?" "Yes, sir, and Princess Sparkle has both a horn and wings. She calls herself an alicorn. She said there are only 4 of them in her world," Searle concluded, still in an undertone. The next half hour was spent with the princess explaining how they had gotten here, how they had tried to present diplomatic papers, and what they hoped the humans could do for them today. And posing for pictures for Tenniel, both with and without the humans. And both as humans and ponies. Castor was sure that it wasn't until the others had actually touched the ponies Lady Dash had insisted they scratch her ears that they began to believe it was all real. The colonel sat with his elbows on his knees. 3 aliens had brought in additional chairs from the dining room. He was thinking as he watched the 4 ponies sit and talk the 2 intelligence agents while Prince BLD watched them disapprovingly and Tenniel filmed them. "Can you show us this portal?" he finally said. Princess Sparkle looked over at him. "Why, certainly." She looked over at Miss Arrow, who stepped back into the hall for a moment. No doubt to pass the word so no pony was caught unawares, Castor figured. "Come along, girls," she said, transforming back to human. "You, too, Blue Blood." With the heartfelt sigh of someone from whom much has been demanded and no recognition given for his efforts, the man stood and waited patiently, leaning ever so slightly on his cane. His expression of boredom seemed to be his default expression. He hadn't smiled or done anything else except frown and roll his eyes the entire time Castor had been watching today. The princess stepped past them and out the door held open by Miss Arrow. The other aliens followed her. The humans came last. Tenniel said, "Could you give me a moment to drop off the exposed film cartridges and pick up new?" "Hurry," instructed the colonel. The man almost ran to the car and popped open the back door to rummage in a bag inside. The Equestrians stopped and watched intently. He looked up at them and asked, "You don't mind if someone picks these up and develops the film?" He held up a small bag. The princess shook her head. "Thanks," he said with a broad smile. He shoved more film cartridges into his pockets, then set the bag on top of the car and closed the door. "They'll be waiting back at both your offices," he half-whispered to the 2 my agents as they caught up with him. Searle was amazed at how much the path across the street changed in a few short meters. Abruptly there was a wooden deck, barely ankle-high above the dirt and with waist-high railings, but looking as if it had been there for years. The deck had the most complete camouflaging coat he had ever seen. Only when you were within couple of feet did you even notice it. If he hadn't seen the aliens stepping up onto it, he might even have tripped on it. The man and woman standing to either side of the deck as they passed showed him he hadn't been imaging things yesterday when he thought he had seen someone. He knew they were close when they entered a depression and the trees spread out a bit as grass carpeted the ground instead of the normal forest debris. He doubted even the most sophisticated examination of a high-altitude picture of the area would reveal anything different from the rest of the forest. Thermal imaging should find the decking, though, as it was certainly a different temperature from the ground. Especially as it cooled off at a different rate than the forest floor in the night. The tent, when it came into sight, was large, expedition-sized, and blended in perfectly with the forest. It was easily 6 by 10 meters. He saw that several trees went straight through its roof. He wondered how they had managed to do that without destroying the roof lines. Or having any cuts or zippers through the fabric that he could see. Standing to either side of the tent's entrance was another set of guards watching them closely as they approached. Castor took several long looks at the surrounding area. He made sure to point out to the colonel the, no doubt, artificially placed blockades that protected the tent from all approaches except this one. The inside had a wooden deck floor, a continuation and expansion of the decking from outside. The front half was a single open area of about 6 by 5 meters, with a table to either side. The roof of the tent was translucent, making the inside of the tent extremely well lit. There were a dozen men and women standing at attention beside the tables, watching them. Oddly, there seemed to be 3 times as many women as men. He heard Princess Sparkle sigh. She said, "At ease." The soldiers relaxed only slightly, keeping their eyes on the humans. There were no weapons of any kind in sight. Dividing the tent in half was a cloth wall with 3 canvas door flaps spaced equidistant across it. Princess Sparkle turned to them. "This is only temporary until we get the ambassadorial papers, then we'll start building a more permanent facility." She pointed at the middle door flap. "That leads to the portal itself." She pointed to the right, "That one leads to the male's changing room." She pointed to the other. "And that leads to the female changing room." She stopped and looked at them. "We are ponies. We don't normally wear clothes except as decoration. When we go through the portal, it changes us to our normal selves. Which means, if we're wearing clothes as people and go through it, the clothes would get dirty, mussed, and ripped up on the other side because of our smaller size as we tried to move around in them. Not to mention the trouble to take them off and put them back on without the assistance of hands. And trying to wear the clothes for this side on the other before coming through. We have the same problems. So we come through and then get dressed. Thus, the changing rooms." She looked at her friends. "Would you like to demonstrate?" The young woman darted into wrong door, causing the princess to sigh. She went to open the center flap, but one of the soldiers hurriedly ran over and opened it for her. She rolled her eyes, and waved the men forward. The hallway was about 1.5 meters wide, he saw as they entered it. The princess followed behind them. The end of the hallway was blocked by the tree, which had a small sign suspended against it and hanging from the hallway walls. Halfway down the hallway, he could see 2 more door flaps, one on either side. Lady Dash came through the one on the right. She waved at them, then turned and jauntily walked straight into the tree and disappeared. Castor wasn't sure which surprised them more, that Lady Dash had apparently walked into a tree and disappeared, that she had been completely NDE and didn't seem to care, or the wonderfully intricate and colorful wings tattoo she had on her back. Colonel Thiessen was frowning, thinking. Can one of us go through? Take a quick look on the other side. He clearly wanted to eliminate the possibility that it was all some sort of stage magician's trick. Princess Sparkle looked uncertain. I'm not sure that is wise, she said slowly. We've only had 2 people go through the portal, so far. One, Mr. Uescher, went through without any changes whatsoever. The other was changed to a pony, which he found to be a very traumatic experience. He's fine, though, she added quickly when she realized what that sounded like. It was just such a surprise, and he didn't know how to walk without falling down all the time. She thought a moment longer, then said, Would it be alright if Mr. Uescher took a couple of your cameras through and took pictures for you? She said, hopefully. Mr. Carroll stepped forward. I would be willing to take the risk. I went through military training when I was younger. If it is unpleasant, I'm sure I can handle it. And if it isn't, well, no harm done, right? Castor was impressed that the man's voice was steady. Stepping onto a different world was daunting. She pressed her lips together tightly, thinking. She sighed and shook her head. Mr. Uesher, she called out. Yes, Your Highness. He stepped into the hallway. She closed her eyes in exasperation, then glared at him. Would you please accompany Mr. Carroll? Perhaps take along a camera to get some pictures for them? I would be delighted, Your Highness. She huffed in annoyance at his continued use of her title as he went over to Mr. Tenniel and they had a quick discussion over which cameras he would take. While they were busy, Princess Sparkle called out again, Emerald Arrow. Would you have some pony pop through the portal to warn every pony that Mr. Uesher and another human are coming through, and that the new human might transform? The princess looked at the humans. We're keeping a close watch on the portal and I wouldn't want any of you to get hurt because some pony was startled. One of the men from the tent's front room hurried in. As he reached the princess, she grabbed his arm and whispered something to him. He quickly walked down the hall and through the tree. We're ready, Your Highness. Uesher had the video camera, running, in his hand, with a new tape in place in case the portal ruined the camera, and a 35mm camera, also with a new roll of film. Right, she said a bit sharply. Make sure you read the sign on the tree. He nodded and tilted his head at Mr. Carroll. They started walking towards the tree. Just relax, Uesher said to the MI agent. It's perfectly safe. Pretend you're stepping through a curtain. As Her Highness said, read the sign. I'll go first. He disappeared through the portal without pausing. The agent hesitated, then squared his shoulders and disappeared as he stepped forward. It had been at least 10 minutes since the two had disappeared through the portal, and they were starting to get worried. Even the princess seemed a bit concerned at the long delay. If something had gone wrong, they would have been back almost immediately, she had reassured them after the first 3 minutes. They're probably just taking a good look around and taking pictures for you. But, now, she turned to her friends outside the hall. Rarity, she said, not quite concealing the worry in her voice, do you think you could check on things? Certainly, Chui, the addressed woman said. Castor heard the door flap on the left side rustle as she went into the changing room. However, before she could come out in the hall, their tardy humans came stumbling back through the portal. Or, rather, Mr. Carroll stumbled back through. Lady Dash was right behind him, his clothes held in her arms. She was laughing hysterically. Mr. Uesher followed her, shaking his head. Finally, lastly, the other guard came through carrying his clothes. He ducked into the men's changing room. Mr. Carroll held to the railing with a solid grip as he stared at them. I flew, he said breathlessly. I became a pony and flew. You should have seen him, crowed Lady Dash. He crashed every time he got more and head height off the ground. The littlest foal could fly rings around him. She returned to laughing, tears coming from her eyes. Mr. Carroll just stared at them. I was a pony, and I flew. He said, incredulously. Mr. Uesher, on the other hand, was just shaking his head sadly. He walked over and handed the cameras to Mr. Tenniel. I shot the entire roll in this camera. He held out the 35mm, and kept the video camera running the entire time, he said dryly. Hopefully, the portal didn't ruin the recording or film. He looked over at Lady Twilight. Some people get all the luck, he said, clearly wishing he could have transformed, as well. She nodded. So, Colonel Jason Thiessen, will that be enough? He returned her nod, staring at the MI agent who was slowly getting himself back under control and realizing he wasn't wearing any clothes. Lady Dash, still giggling, shoved the man's clothes into his arms and said, Hey, Chui, are we done here? I need to go kick some clouds or Ponyville is going to have some nasty weather tonight. Oh, sure, Dash. See you later. The NDE woman turned and took a short running leap through the portal. For royalty and nobles, these young ponies were more than a little rough around the edges. The only one that came close to the image of a noble was Prince BLD. Was it the difference between those born into nobility and those who were not? Or was this just something natural for them? The difference between males and females. The humans followed the equestrians as they headed back to the house. When they reached the vehicles, the colonel stopped and said, "I will make sure that your request for an embassy is taken to the highest authorities possible, as quickly as possible. In the meantime, if there is anything I can do to assist you, please contact me." He held out his business card to the princess. "Thank you for your assistance," she said. "If you have any questions, please give me a call. I believe Detective Inspector Searle has our number here." She gave Castor a quick smile. He nodded. "Yes, I remember it." The princess, followed by the rest of her entourage, went inside the house. Miss Arrow stopped on the front porch and watched them. "All right, gentlemen. I think we should head to Thames House to debrief and inform your superiors of what we've discovered. Sergeant Searle, you'll come with us. Just leave your keys on the driver's side floor and someone will return it to Guilford for you. And let's see that video from the other side before we go anywhere." To say the video was astonishing was an understatement. To see the MI agent floundering around in his suddenly wrongly proportioned clothes was both amusing and scary. To see him flap his wings once he was out of the clothes and actually lift off the ground was amazing. Watching Lady Dash flying circles around him while coaxing him to fly was simply indescribable. There could be no doubt that the portal was real, that there really was another world on the other side of that tree. They had really, truly, been contacted by an alien race from another planet. The implications were as terrifying as they were amazing. Man was not alone in the universe. That would rock every religion on Earth. That they were miniature talking ponies merely added to the surreal atmosphere of the situation. Mankind was not unique. The park-like atmosphere around the tree, with its spiraling deck, and the massive stone walls a short distance away were puzzling. It all looked as if it had been there for years, yet the princess had told Castor that they had only known the portal's location for a month. After the tape finished, Mr. Carroll took the wheel and started them back to London. Castor spent most of the drive recounting what he had learned from talking with the princess. They were not pleased to hear the equestrians had already taken over 6,000 books on culture, science, technology, and history through the portal. Mr. Dodgson, the security service agent M.I.5, was already making plans to visit the little whinging bookstore to see exactly how much human knowledge had been plundered and where they might expect the equestrians to have difficulties understanding. Not to mention what they knew that the government wished they did not. "Well, Sergeant Searle," Colonel Thiessen said, "at the moment, you have the most information on these equestrians, based on what you've said. And this Princess Sparkle seems to like you." Castor looked at the colonel in growing horror. The colonel sighed. "I may not be in the chain of command anymore, but it looks like you're going to be reactivated until this is sorted," he said sympathetically. Oh bloody hell. Castor had just known he was going to get the short end of the stick. His wife would not be amused that he was once more in the sport and social. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 15. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.